Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Meat Monogamy podcast. It is your girl, Liv, your gracious host. I also go by my long name of Olivia Lara Owen. If you're just finding us, welcome. I'm so happy that you're here. This is a long form podcast, and this is really about all the episodes here. It's really about nourishment and living a life where you feel connected to something that you feel devoted to, where you feel like you trust yourself. And ultimately, what I really care about is supporting you to build a life that can actually hold you. Okay, so thank you for all of my devoted listeners, and especially thank you for everybody that listened to the last episode where I had the wonderful Clara on the podcast. That has been our most downloaded episode so far, and I'm not surprised. It was a really, really wonderful conversation to have, and I was super excited about it landing in your ears or in your eyes, and it seems to have struck a chord in a good way. So thank you so much for everybody that has just reached out and sent a little note about that, and just said that there was things that we were talking about that just rung true for you and sort of helped jiggle the cage or shift the needle on something. So that's really what we want here. And when I think about all the episodes, each one really has an intention behind it. And today I'm going to be speaking all about the moment just before the bloom. Okay, so I'm going to be talking today about a story and something that happened a couple of years ago in when I was right at the tail end of my life in Paris. And I'm going to link it all the way to now and share with you something very exciting that I am offering. And I will say, if you are listening to this sort of relatively in real time, please keep Sunday, the 26th of April free, because I have a very special event happening that I'm going to be inviting you to. So just keep it free if you are listening to this and this is resonating. I do also want to say I had a couple of weeks off over the holidays. I hiked a mountain with my partner, and that was really like a dream. It's like one of the highest mountains in England. That was really challenging for me, but it was also great bonding for us, like stretched our relationship in good ways. And I also spent some time with my family, and I also got to just be kind of immersed. So I wasn't intending to take, significant time off, but coming back on this Monday, I'm like, oh, I feel like I've been off. And so I've got that feeling of like, I have so much to say. I'm so excited about today's episode, and I'm so excited about some of the things that are happening in the coming weeks. So I hope you are sat. Because we are going to get into things. Okay, so let's kick things off. And I want to start this episode with a question. Okay. I really find questions can be so powerful. A good question can really challenge your thinking, challenge your perspective. And if you are a growth oriented honey, which I'm sure you are, if you are listening to this podcast, and you're wanting to you know interrogate a little bit some of the perspectives and ways of thinking that you might currently have about yourself and your situation and your life right now, then maybe this question is for you. And I want you to let this question land rather than sort of immediately following or jumping to an answer that, like, maybe your head just immediately, your mind is like, I have the answer, right? I want you to just let something else answer. What that something else is, up for your interpretation, but just take a moment. Okay. So this is the question. What truth about yourself have you been carrying for a long time without fully acting on it? Okay. So just let that land and listen for the deeper version of their answer, if there is one. There might not be just immediately, and that's okay too. But what is the real answer? Okay. So perhaps one that lives, just underneath the life you're currently living. And perhaps you are living a life right now where you're managing a lot, right? What is the deeper truth, perhaps, that you've been carrying for a really long time, but you haven't yet fully acted on it? Okay. Hmm. Okay. So it's Easter. So we're in, for us Northern Hemisphere honeys, we are in the transition from winter to spring. This is my favorite transition, as you probably heard me talk about. I also think it's one of the most challenging and the one that can be the most sort of change can happen around this time. Okay. Um, so I call this the real new year, and I've definitely been feeling that. I had a really kind of, I want to say explosive March, but that's probably the wrong word. I would say that's a bit too strong for explosive, but expansive. March, so much happened in March. And, March for me was kind of like what most people expect January to be, this like movement, lots happening. And especially towards the end of March, like really as we were starting to really shift gears and shift seasons. So, you know, I call this the real new year because, January has this sort of like, to me, quite an artificial feeling of, those lists and those, often sort of pointless resolutions. And, no shade, but just like it, it tends to be, stroke the surface versus sort of meet our lives where they actually are at that time of year. And so I find that this transition is the one that sort of actually arrives in the body before the mind can sort of make sense of what's happening. Okay. So this is the one that like almost like even less of a sort of a beginning, but more of a recognition of like this moment is this sort of in between, right? Like, even with the traditional sense of an end and a beginning, it's never like one day it's an end and then the next day it's a beginning. Like it's a process, right? And I find that this time of year you're sort of recognizing like you're in a bit of a process. Like you're kind of a little bit in between. Okay. So, and if that's you, you're kind of like feeling in between right now. You're not quite where you were, but you're also not where you are like going yet. This is exactly for you, right? This is the episode for you. Okay. So, yeah, I hope that that just kind of lands for you physically and sort of inside of you. So you can just sense like the actual tangible thing I'm speaking about here. So I want to take you back to 2 years ago. Literally, I wrote this piece called Provenance. You may have received it if you are a mailing list subscriber or a social media subscriber of mine, which I hope you are, by the way. As if you're not, please sign up and be a part of that because I do send some great emails and great newsletters and things like that. So 2 years ago, and I actually wrote this piece like last week when I was traveling back on a long bus ride, and I wrote the piece and then I posted it and then I realized I literally was speaking to like the next day I got the Facebook notification memory come in that it had literally been 2 years to the day. So I was really sensing something very real when I wrote that piece. So 2 years ago, I was, I didn't know at the time, but I was at the tail end of my life in Paris. And it was a difficult time. It was Easter. I was technically homeless. And when I say it was Easter, I mean that, it's a bit of a family moment. It's sort of a pause, it's holiday time. Everything kind of stops for a moment. And, I was technically homeless. I'd given up my apartment on the solstice in March, so a couple of weeks earlier. And I was just sort of suspended midair. That's how it felt. I was kind of between places. I was between versions of myself. There was this real sense of being uprooted. Like my roots had been just like pulled from the ground. I was pretty burnt out, and I was pretty disillusioned. There was like a lot that was kind of coming up for me at that time. And, that state in the body, like I just felt like physically quite fried. You ever had that like nervous system feeling where your body just feels just spent, fried, on fire? And it wasn't just like the circumstances of that time where I felt suspended and like I was just between and I didn't really know what I was between, but I also felt this like sense of it. I felt so depleted. And I could really sense that I had been overriding myself for quite some time. And I just kind of lost the thread of what was true for my life. And a friend of mine at the time, the gorgeous Maya, who is just this wonderful woman who I'd met in the sort of latter season of my time in Paris. It's one of those friendships where I'm like, oh, I wish, she only arrived as I was sort of on my way out. And that kind of happens when you move somewhere, you meet people when you're at these like slightly different stages of the journey, but then you overlap. And Maya and I, struck up a bond. She has been, doing the work that I do for many, many years. She was is an elder, and is just so full of wisdom. And, a conversation with Maya is so kind of world opening in just hearing her life story. And so I am such a fan of intergenerational friendships. I have very close friends of many different ages, and I really appreciated this kind of kinship moment that me and Maya had. And so I think she knew that I was sort of I was in need of a little lady nourishment. I was in the mood for a little lady nourishment. And Maya is also a spiritual woman as well. And so she invited me over to her house and said, look, I'm hosting this event with this really amazing woman who is a healer, who is a guide. And I just sense that it will be a good time for you to come to this ladies event. And I was like, I'm not really I think it was like tarot. I was like, it's not really like fully my thing on like first glance. Like it's not something that I would seek out myself, but it was a really special invitation. And I just somewhere within was like, I should go to this event. So it, like I remember walking in and I just remember immediately there was like flowers everywhere and the smell was so gorgeous and the space was so gorgeous. And I just immediately felt this like, oh, I'm being held, and I really, really needed that feeling at that time. Anyway, so the woman who was working with us, this really gorgeous human called Amanda. And when it came to me, bearing in mind, Amanda knows nothing about me, right? She knows nothing about my situation. She knows nothing about the fact that like I'm leaving France and I'm, at that time I was going to head back to the UK and just spend a bit of time sort of recovering in the countryside with my family. But there was no like kind of big, I'm moving home commitment at that time. There was just like, I don't really know where I'm supposed to go, but I'm just going to trust that I need a little bit of time to figure this out. So she looks at me, pulls my card, and she just immediately says this word, like provenance. And she channels from her guides for a moment and just kind of just speaks all of this truth into the room. She's like, you're being called back to the original thread of your life. She kept repeating this word, provenance. And at the time, I didn't really know what it meant, the actual word. I remember like knowing what it meant, but not really knowing what it meant mentally. Kind of like I could hear exactly what she was speaking to, but it didn't initially click what that word meant, right? And she kept repeating, you're being called back to the original thread of your life. She also mentioned romance, but it was sort of like it's actually not key to this story, but she said you're being called back and there's this like big romance thread ahead, which was interesting, which is a conversation for a different day. But this origin, right? So, provenance, the place of origin, right? It it's like to derive, right? To obtain or return to source, right? Like receiving from the source was really the message, right? You're gonna go home, you're being guided home, there's this homecoming, and you are gonna need to receive from the source, right? And I was like, wow, that is so poignant, And then I told her a little bit about my story and like where I was at the time. And so, I came home to the UK and, very quickly within those first few months, that summer 2 years ago, I just felt so clear that like the anchor was dropping and there was this full circle thing happening, returning to this, what began as sort of a temporary pause really became this bigger and more permanent thing. And I really was very guided by my body's sort of sense of safety and like just the truth of it, oh, okay. I think I've needed to go really far away from home. And I'd, came back with all this like wisdom from my travels. I'd been like kind of on the road and living overseas or traveling overseas for many years since I was, a young teenager, really. Um, and I was like, how interesting that I've ended up back here. I could never have imagined. It was never the plan. I was never thinking that this is where, me and all of my, quirks and was I going to end up back in like rural UK? I just really didn't believe that. And so, there was so many things that were sort of lining up with this return to the original thread. And as I've mentioned, it was so confronting for me on like an ego level. I was like, what am I going to have to give up? I don't know if I can give up that. I had a lot of identities that was sort of confronted by this choice of simplicity and sort of like a normal life. I was like, I've lived a very abnormal life, do I just really want this normal life? But then I would go on walks and I was just like, yes, yes, I want this. This is what I want. I want this. I want this more than anything. This is the life beyond my wildest dreams, not like the life I thought was beyond my wildest dreams that I've been sort of chasing for many, many years. So, there was lots of internal objections, as there should be, right? Like with any transformation and change, what we're going to have, the internal committee being like, I don't really know about this. That's kind of normal. So if you've experienced that, I just want to say it's super normal to have objections, and I think it's important to learn how to listen to them and help dismantle them a little bit and listen to any wisdom that they might be carrying, because ultimately what I was able to see was coming home to this place of, the original place was really like the cave I feared to enter was the one filled to the brim with the gold. Like that was really the truth. Like it was the truth. So, I received so many gifts and continue to receive so many gifts from being here, like a lot of family complexity and actually turning towards the complexity of my role within my family and just all of the different dynamics, and it really allowed me to practice and face this pattern that I'd been running from a really really long time. I'd been so afraid to sort of face some of those original wounds that are really hard to attend to from afar because you're not sort of in the dynamics on the daily, right? So coming back into the family system and really, you know, turning towards some of the things that I truly believe that I was never going to make it through, really has supported me on sort of understanding myself and understanding how important it is that we do confront some of these pretty core patterns. Some of mine are feeling like deeply responsible for the lives of other people and feeling like, you know, people won't be okay unless I do X, Y, and Z. If I sacrifice myself, people just won't be okay. the patterns of feeling deeply judged. So being like, I'm going to go away and do this all on my own so I don't have to face the judgment that you might have because I'm somehow, unique and different. I also had a real sense of pride, and I really wanted to just go and make my own money and have sort of no support and not really need anyone. And it was very humbling to come home and be like, I actually really need support. And I'm going to need support on an ongoing basis because I would love to have a family. And like, how am I going to have a family without the support of my family? And just having to confront so many things I thought that I just didn't need to address because I was going to figure it out all on my own. Um, I also, the steadiness of the countryside. I mean, I am somebody who really regulates in nature. Not only does it regulate me on a physical level, I also really like nature is my spiritual home. Like I find, God in the garden and the spirit in the woods. Like that has always been me since I was a child. And so I think living in a city was hard for me. I felt sort of cut off from some of my regulation tools, but also my spiritual fill up. And so the steadiness of that countryside, it just gave me the calm and the connection to recover and rebuild. And do that in its own time and not be kind of putting on all this pressure to rush. And then this familiarity of this land, it just allowed me to remember myself. And like the I just needed that, and it also allowed me to have the space to open up to love and to truly do that, and to have the space for that, and in I had to almost in a way sort of let go of identities that I had outgrown in order to do that. And so that was, all of this gold that I had been sort of avoiding. I was like, oh my God, there's so much here. Okay. And I'm sharing all of this, right? Not because my story is your story, but because I think a lot of you are in your own version of this moment right now. And you've been holding a lot, you've been running a lot, you've been overriding a lot, and something underneath somewhere is asking you to stop. It's asking you to return, and it's asking you to remember. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Okay, so I know so many of you are in your own version of this, right? I have these conversations with you in your deep dives, in our work together, in the messages you send me. Like, I know that this is, what some of you are going through. Okay. So let's just take a sip. Just going to take a sip before we get into the meat and the juice of I'm going to just share a couple of my key teachings for you in this place, because I think this is really important. Okay. So what I have found is that, the first teaching I have for you, right, for this episode today is around the difference between clarity and orientation. Okay. So what does that mean? So most of you, and I say this a lot, do not have a clarity problem. And you think you do, but you do not. You have so much more clarity than you think you do. You might need to ask different questions in order to actually be able to hear the clarity, but I know from experience of speaking with hundreds of you that you haven't, okay? You do not have a clarity problem. You do tend to have an orientation problem. And this is great news because it is something that we can work with and solve very easily together, okay? So, what does a orientation problem mean? This is around like you cannot navigate forward without first understanding where you are truly starting from. Okay. So, this is interesting because I find that people want to like just keep going, 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 and just trying to get forward motion, forward motion, forward motion, forward motion. And it's very hard to navigate forward without really being able to like pause and be like, well, where am I right now? Okay, where are we starting from? Right. And right? And it's not like the version of you right now that's just managing, pushing forward, overriding, not that version. We want to actually understand what is the ground beneath your feet right now. What is the ground beneath your feet right now? Like this ground beneath your feet. What is it? Okay. So if you're someone that's like circling decisions, this is not a failure. You're not like not intelligent because you keep circling around a decision. It is a signal. It's a sign, right? It's your system telling you that you're trying to move from a place that you're not like steady enough yet to move from this place. Okay. And that is good information to have, right? That you're not steady yet to keep moving forward or to take a step forward. That is okay because we can work with it. Okay. So when you connect this to your body, when your nervous system is in a dysregulated state and you're depleted and you're running on overdrive, clarity cannot really land. You may have the clarity, you may know, but you can't really land it. And it's not because you don't have it. It's because there's no stillness in which to receive it. You're just like going, you're going, you're going. And then clarity is like floating around, just it can't land. We need to land it. Land it. Okay. And that is the first thing I do with my women, right? That is what we do when we initially meet, right? In the deep dives, we get clarity. We work with clarity. Where are you today? Okay. And we can call this provenance, right? I bring you back to the original truth. You've always known about yourself. You've always known about your path, right? We not a new truth. We're not like hunting for something new and sparkly to like slap on top. We're actually saying, I'm not giving you anything. Like, I'm not going to give you a truth that you didn't already have. I'm going to help you locate what was always there. Okay. And this is going to be the thing that lives beneath the noise, the second guessing, right? The places where you're managing expertly everything, right? We're going to return to the source and we're going to begin from the source. Okay. So that is orientation. Okay. This is like the first phase of the way that I work with people. We orient first. Okay. So the second thing I want to talk about is, you hear me harp on about self-trust, and it's a big part of the work I do because once we are oriented to where you are, then it becomes a lot easier to get clearer on like, well, where are you headed? And then the way you get there is by learning to trust yourself. Okay. And self trust is really key. It's one of the fundamentals. It's one of the first things we work with because it's not like a confidence practice where, you're reading affirmations out to yourself in the mirror. It's a, it's a return. And it's not something you build by doing tons more and moving through things quickly, pushing through uncertainty and just like forcing things. No, no, no. This is something that comes from returning to yourself, right? Your body always knows. It's always known. And there tends to just be a lot of overriding on top of that knowledge. Okay. So the self-trust work is not to manufacture trust, but it's to stop overriding the signals that are already there, but you're just really hard to hear them. Okay. So some of these things you might be doing is like staying super busy, intellectualizing all of your feelings, moving to the next thing before the last thing has landed. And then perhaps you really live up top mentally, right? You live in a sort of mind space rather than living from your body. And again, I always like to caveat that and say the mind is a brilliant tool. And I definitely am very inclusive to the mind in my work because our minds are brilliant tools and we do need to learn how to work with our minds and our mindset and like how we are thinking and seeing and believing the world. And at the same time, it has to be in, a relationship with the body where, the body is something that is really fundamental and central to the way you're living and creating. Okay. So, when we are overriding ourselves in all of those ways, this is not because, we're bad people and we're, flawed. This is not, it's a survival strategy, right? This is a way you've survived through using these things, right? Like busyness is a massive one, sort of intellectualizing, justifying your feelings, making sense of them all, speeding past the ending, straight to the new beginning, chasing the peaks of things, right? This is a survival strategy. And at a certain point with my women, for you, it becomes like you outlive it being useful to you anymore. And you're just like, I need a different thing. Okay. And so I call this the restoration phase of the work. And this is where, we return to the body. This is a place of like, how do you have the body be a place of steadiness, self-trust, and remembrance? And this is imagine how differently you feel about what you're trying to do and move towards if you feel steady in the body, if you trust yourself, and if you are in a place where you can remember those, internal nudges and those internal truths that have always been there. Okay. So I always like to say that your insights, your brilliant insights are brilliant, but they don't create change on their own, right? Your body has to feel safe enough to act. If you do not feel safe in the body, it is very, very hard to move. And your body needs to feel safe enough to trust what it knows, right? Again, that's that clarity in the air, nowhere to land. Once it has a place to land, it's a lot easier to trust it. Okay. You need to feel safe enough to stop overriding yourself. It's not something that you just do straight away, right? You need safety in order to do that. Okay. So self-trust is not something that belongs in the mind. It is something that belongs in the body when the body feels safe enough to finally speak the truth. Okay. Right. So restoration is so key. So, so key. Okay. Let's just take a breather. There. Mm. Mm. Okay. And then the third, and this is, the moment just before the bloom. Okay. So this is like, um, this is that in-between feeling I was speaking about earlier. And it's honestly one of the most important moments in the cycle, right? This is the moment like right before the bloom, not the bloom itself, but like the moment right before it. Something in you is sort of reorganizing itself beneath the surface. And, there's like life kind of coming back, returning before it starts to grow. Right? Think about how important that process is in nature, right? Like life is returning to the ground before it starts to grow. And think of that tendency to want to rush it and like, come on, grow, like actually just allowing it to, oh yeah, allowing it to just be, allowing the process of growing to just be. And that moment right before it comes, like that is so important. Okay. And there's so much tendency here to rush and force and get impatient and override this in between moment because it feels so uncomfortable and unproductive. And you're like, oh my God, like what the fuck is happening? But this is precisely that moment that really deserves care. Like care. Think about care. Care is so central to my work with my women. Care and caring for myself and caring for you and demonstrating principles of care is so integral to the work that I do, right? Like that to me is being in right relationship with my work. And that to me is what is required to hold things with the most care. Okay. And this is mm, like it can be really hard to learn how to do this. And it does take some time, right? And we won't always nail it and like get it right, but it's so important. And, this is the third piece that I hold. And that is, the third thing I do is around stewardship, supporting you with stewarding. And what it means is really helping you identify like what is actually yours to hold right now, like what matters, what can wait. How do you move forward from a place that feels actually true rather than, anything that feels urgent or pressured? Okay. And so this is like you really getting a grounded and honest sense of direction that you can actually sustain, right? Like, I really believe that sustainable direction it's really the only kind worth building. I mean, I've just wasted so much time building in an unsustainable direction, right? And I just really believe that this is the only kind worth building from. Mm. Okay, so stewardship is the third piece here, right? So we start off with clarity, right? Turning to the original thread. Then we come to the restoration phase, and then we come to the stewardship phase. And as you can feel, they all build on top of each other. Okay. So let's just slow down here and, take all of this in. Okay. Right. I want you to sit with this question. I have another question for you. Okay. So, and this is something for you to sit with after this episode. Okay. What would it mean for you to stop managing your life from the outside and return to what you have always known from within? Okay. So how do you allow yourself to pause, right? And to stop managing your life from the outside and return to a place, that you've always known is there, that internal place. Mm. And I want you to feel this physically because I think it's so important to have the like sort of somatic signal here of what it feels like in the body, right? You might want to like jot something down, write something down if you're just listening to this in a way that you can access, or just let yourself be with this for the rest of today, right? Perhaps you're like, okay, like, right, 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 right. Okay, how does that feel? Okay, so take it with you. Take it with you. And, this is perhaps, unsurprisingly, really what I'm most known for in my work, right? My women come to me at very specific points in the journey, and it's usually not when everything is falling apart. There's usually a sense that something is starting to reorganize itself, and there's like like a real desire for the kind of space that can really meet like the internal rearrangement that's happening. Okay. And the the thing that I had mentioned at the beginning that's really exciting is from this space, I have created an event called Origin. Okay. So I had said to you keep the Sunday, 26th of April from 4 to 7 BST. So that is 4 to 7 UK time. Keep it free. Um, Origin is a 3-hour live experience, and this is where we're going to be working with clarity, self trust, and grounded direction. Okay. This is the front door into my work. Okay. It is for those of you women that are done circling and you are ready to return to the original thread. Okay. And if your interest is piqued and you're like, I need to be there at this live event on Sunday, 26th of April, then the first step is before Origin, I'm offering something completely free and a live masterclass, my flagship masterclass, which is called Unshakable Self-Trust. And that is happening on Wednesday, the 15th of April. So by the time this goes live, it's going to be pretty much like the next day. So this is a great time to be signed up because I will be sharing everything about Origin at Unshakable Self-Trust. They are going to be those of you that come and sign up, even if you just sign up, you can't come live, you will be the first ones to get access to tickets to Origin. Okay. So the link to the Self-Trust Masterclass is in the show notes of this episode. So please go there and find find your way into the room. I think this is going to be a really, really, really important event. And it's really giving you like a real taste of the deeper work I do with women in my longer container. Okay. So yes, very excited about these next few weeks. We have lots of really exciting things happening and just really kind of fun, organic evolution of the work happening. Okay, so let's land the plane and come back to, provenance, right? The original thread of your life, the place of origin, right? You may know exactly what I'm talking about. You may have been carrying it your whole life. You might just be at the moment where you're just ready to stop carrying it alone and you are ready for, deeper support. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed today. Please always feel free to subscribe and rate us and send me a message if you got really like loved up in this episode with some beautiful truth. Like, I'd love to hear from you. And I will see you in the next episode. And I really hope that I will also see you live on Wednesday for Unshakable Self-Trust. Okay. That's all for today, my loves. See you very, very soon.